Hello and welcome to It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi on Megapix Media. Joining me today is Franco Terrazzano, who is Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thanks for joining us today, Franco.
Hey, well, thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, well, in the news in the last week or so, there's been a lot of controversy over politicians, Alberta politicians, and federally as well in other provinces going away on holidays during lockdowns. First of all, I just want to get your thoughts on that. What do you think of politicians who I guess leave their areas during a lockdown?
Well, just this whole situation has been very hypocritical from these politicians. But I think if the scandal could teach us one thing, where you had politicians who were traveling internationally while families and businesses were locked down during the holidays, it would be that we need recall legislation. Albertans, we need the ability to be able to hold our politicians accountable, and we need the ability to be able to fire misbehaving politicians more than once every 4 years or just during the election year. We should have the ability to hold politicians accountable every year, right? And that means that we need recall legislation.
Okay, now when you talk about recall legislation, Franco, what do you mean by that? And how would something like that look?
Yeah, so recall legislation are rules that let voters collect petitions, and if we collect enough petitions, we can force a by-election to potentially boot a misbehaving politician. Now, we do have recall rules in our province to the west, out in British Columbia. They've been there since 1995. And importantly for Alberta is that we had Premier Jason Kenney, when he was campaigning for votes in 2019, he promised Albertans recall legislation. Last year, his government, during its February throne speech, it also promised recall legislation then. So we're still waiting on recall legislation. We have heard Premier Kenney say that it's going to be implemented this winter session. Of course, it would have been very useful for this scandal. So it's something that we have to keep holding the Premier's feet to the fire on.
Well, it's not to be cynical, but it's a great campaign promise for any politician, right? But the fruits of that promise usually don't turn out, do they?
Well, people are angry right now. I'm angry, and I think Albertans have every single right to be angry. But that frustration is only going to escalate if we don't get the promised recall legislation. Now, one of the things that I've been hearing from Albertans, outside of the obvious, which is the hypocrisy from this whole situation, the other thing I've been hearing is that Albertans are frustrated because we feel like our politicians don't understand the sacrifices they're asking us to make, or aren't willing to make those same sacrifices, right? We've had businesses who are forced to close their doors. Some may never open up again. Jobs are obviously at risk here. Families had to spend holidays apart, but yet we don't see our politicians willing to make those same types of sacrifices. So I really do see frustrations continuing to increase unless we're given the opportunity, the democratic opportunity, to hold politicians accountable.
Let me ask you just one last thing, Franco. Obviously in the role that you have and your organization, there's always a lot of anger over rising taxes, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at the level of anger that is there right now in this province specifically over the politicians that have traveled away over the last couple of weeks or so, can you not quantify it, but put that in perspective for me? Have you ever seen this level of anger out there?
Well, it's certainly a lot of anger, and I think it's rightly because of what is happening, but it's been building, right? For the last 5 years, Alberta's been going through such a troubling downturn where businesses have been closing their doors, where workers, especially those outside of government, have lost their job, have taken pay cuts to help their businesses stay afloat. And I just feel an increasing tension between the government and those working outside of the government, and it's just something that is continuing to build. And I think when we're talking about the current situation, where you had politicians who are locking down businesses, jobs are obviously at risk, it is very frustrating to then hear that our politicians were traveling internationally. And one of the outlets for this frustration that has been building, and one reason why it's so important, is recall legislation, right? Give Albertans the ability to put our frustrations into a democratic outlet. And that is one of the key reasons why we do need recall legislation.
Okay, super. Well, thanks for joining us today, Franco.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, great. That was Franco Terrazzano, who is the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. This has been It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi on Megapix Media. Thanks for joining us today.